music is about relationship. It's about me communicating to you. It's about trying to say, can we find each other through music when we don't have words? We don't know, but we do what we can. And we do it out of our love of God and our brothers and sisters and our children.
You are listening to the Christian Music Archive podcast, part of the New Release Today podcast network. I'm your host, Dave Maurer. Each week, I share stories about Christ, community, and music, chatting with musical guests who you will find listed on the pages of the Christian Music Archive. There are thousands of creative men and women who have helped shape the soundtrack of the Christian faith, and we get to hear their stories, learn about how Christ has made a difference in their life, and hopefully along the way, we'll learn how we can be a better part of our community. Hello, my friend. Thank you for joining me for episode 89 of the podcast. Today's episode is a real treat for me because we are chatting with one of the pioneers in contemporary Christian music. As a young 20-something in the early 1970s, Adrian Snell was looking for ways to share his music with a bigger audience and was encouraged by another British pioneer music group, Malkin and Alwyn, to sign a deal with their fledgling Christian music label. This opened the opportunity to tour the United States, and Adrian has some real fun stories about his first experiences on the road with Sweet Comfort Band. You'll want to hear those, but more fascinating to me than those early tales from the road is how God has transitioned his music career into a different role, that of a music counselor. We chat about the power of music and how we may never be fully aware of the impact we are making in the world around us by following our God-given talents. This is another great episode, and we're going to get right into it after this message about Mercy, Inc. I want to tell you about the Rohingya people of South Asia. For 40 years, these people have faced discrimination, violence, and persecution, so much so that in 2018, lawmakers unanimously adopted a motion to recognize the Rohingya crisis as a genocide, describing it as crimes against humanity. This crisis has forced over 1 million Rohingya people to flee to other countries, and about 900,000 of them have fled to the coast of Bangladesh. According to Mercy, Inc., 52% of these refugees are women and girls, now living in 34 different refugee camps. Cox's Bazar is the largest refugee settlement in the world, and it's located there in Bangladesh. It's a dense mesh of bamboo and tarp shelters, and fires are one of the big hazards that happen to these extremely vulnerable refugees. In fact, in March 2021, 10,000 homes burned down and at least 45,000 people were displaced. Mercy, Inc. and its partners help the world's most vulnerable people in 13 countries, and that includes Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. Mercy has been on the ground in Bangladesh for 5 years, bringing relief, hope, and the tangible love of Jesus. Would you like to be part of the essential, ongoing work that is bringing hope to Rohingya refugees? Please go to mercyinc.org to read about the work they are doing. The work Mercy, Inc. is striving to bring long-lasting change, both physically and spiritually. And I'd invite you to join the movement and bring hope to these generations. Learn how by visiting mercyinc.org today. When the Jesus movement was getting started in the United States, British musicians were also looking to use music to express their faith through their own gospel beat movement. And one of those early music pioneers is Adrian Snell. Adrian released his first album in 1975 and has gone on to release more than 20 albums. Then in 1990, he quit being a professional musician, and he decided he was going to use music as a therapy tool, and we're going to find out about that. But he's continued making music. In fact, he just released in March his latest project called Kintsugi, The Art of Precious Scars, and I'm excited to learn about that project. So join me in welcoming to the podcast, Adrian Snell, all the way from the UK.
Hey, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Dave. I'm ready for you.
Thank you. Well, you got started, it's almost 50 years ago. Can you believe that? I mean, that doesn't seem possible.
I know. I find that hard believing because it doesn't feel like that. But I think because I grew up with music sort of at the core of my life, I was writing songs around the age of sort of 14, 15, which isn't particularly unusual.
Right.
I mean, lots of teenagers write songs. And now that I better well just come out with it. Now that I'm 67. You're quite right. That's 52 years. What I didn't know when I started writing a song, of course, was that was going to be my career.
Yeah. Well, what was it that made you start wanting to write in the first place? You know, I think of a lot of kids, 14 years old, they're out wanting to play ball, they're out wanting to run in the woods, you know, do that kind of stuff. What was it that prompted you to say, I'm going to start putting thoughts to music?
In a strange way, it wasn't a choice.
Really? Explain that.
It was the only way I could express the really authentic, sort of deep, even sometimes hidden part of me that I wanted people to know or sense, but I couldn't put it into words. And because music had already become so important to me from the age of 5, I think 6.
Okay.
What I couldn't have articulated this then, but what I know was happening was that I was finding a way as a 6-year-old of going, and in those days, to the piano and just playing what I was feeling. And from that little sort of early glimpse into the language of music, what basically happened, I think, is and it still goes on to this very day, is that I discovered that was the way I could better express who I was, who I am.
Yeah.
What are my priorities? What are my loves? What do I care about through this language of music? So there is a sense in which it wasn't a choice.
Yeah.
It was just, you know, I sometimes ask myself, what on earth would I have done without music?
Yeah.
And you know, it's almost like a scary place to be.
So you were kind of on that early 70s, the whole world was starting to, you know, kind of that hippie movement and kind of, you know, the gospel beat movement there in the UK. What was it that caused you to say, well, I'm going to take these things and put them on an album and let other people hear them and not just, you know, for my circle of friends?
It's a very good question. I think I started, you know, more seriously performing concerts and sort of beginning to travel with my music around 1972-3.
Okay.
And I had gone to the music college up in the north of England in a city called Leeds, and because I was at music college, of course, my musical ideas, my musical language was growing, developing every day, which is the privilege you have when you're at a music school. You know, you're listening to music, you're collaborating with other musicians, So I knew that because I was coming up with, let's say, quite structured pieces of music that I felt very comfortable with, I felt, that's what I want to say. The next obvious stage was, well, how do I get other people to hear that beyond just performing in concert? And clearly, one way would be recording. But this is, you know, we probably won't have time to go into this in great depth, but I really, really, at that stage in my life, was not thinking of myself as Adrian, Christian musician.
Right.
Absolutely, I was a Christian. There was, you know, no question about that. There were no doubts about my faith. But I wanted my music, my work, to be heard by anyone, by everyone.
Yeah.
What I do remember is that as I began to tour, and in particular, I think there was one tour when I ended up joining forces with a duo called Malcolm and Alwyn.
Oh, yes.
I remember performing with them. I think it was in a town called Newcastle here in Britain. And in the dressing room, after the concert, they were reflecting on what they'd heard from me. And it was very encouraging. And we were talking about next steps. And they said, why don't you think about recording with a Christian recording company? We have a company that, you know, are recording us called Kingsville or MGO in those days. Yeah. And that's what set me on that path. And because we could be going down all sorts of side avenues here, I'm not sure that I think that was the best decision for me.
Interesting.
But that's the decision I made.
Yeah.
Was to go and so they told MGO about me. That you've got to hear Adrian, blah, blah. And step by step, within about a year, that led to MGO saying, "Yeah, we want to record you. We want to release your music on our label."
So, and is that how you then made it across the pond, so to speak, and how you got picked up over here?
Yes, a few years later, though.
Right.
And that was when the company that I was with had an affiliation, shall I put it that way,
Gotcha.
with Maranatha Music in California, Costa Mesa.
Yeah.
So they had, it was kind of a collaboration in a way. I think it was about, British musicians wanting to be heard in America, and to a lesser extent, American musicians wanting to be heard in Britain.
Okay.
And I was one of those. So I was invited out, and I did some concerts. In fact, I toured in up the West Coast.
Okay.
With a band called Sweet Comfort.
Yes, Sweet Comfort Band. Very good. Yes.
I remember it so well. And that was my first experience of working as a performer in America.
Yeah.
With this crazy band, Sweet Comfort. And I would do an opening set at the piano, and then they would come on with the full band and do their thing. But I learned so much in those days about American culture, about approach to music, about the place of Christian music in America. So much that was completely different from the UK.
Yeah.
But that's how that started. It was a kind of a reciprocal agreement. Maranatha listened to my stuff and said, "Yeah, let's tour Adrian." And I presume Kingsway probably tried to set up some concerts for Sweet Comfort or something.
Yeah.
In Europe.
Well, what a band to work with. I mean, Brian Duncan and all those guys, they were a little bit on the crazy side, weren't they?
They were. You know what? I tell this story sometimes because now I laugh my head off at this. Two things. My first visit, on the first day after I woken up, they took me to a sort of, I think it was Wendy's Burgers.
Okay.
And I got my burger on my plate with my chips, and I asked if I could have a knife and fork.
And they were saying, what?
And the band just went crazy. And they never, ever let me forget this. I'm an Englishman. I'm polite. I have manners,
Oh, that's hilarious.
It is. The second story, which is kind of, this one is really embedded in my head. It was, I don't think they'll mind me telling you this, because they were such a crazy group of people.
Yeah.
Any journey in America is like 10 times longer than a journey in England.
Sure. Yeah.
And one of our early concerts, we had to drive from Costa Mesa up to Tacoma or something.
Okay.
It was a long drive,
yeah.
And gradually during the drive, everybody fell silent, and they were doing their own thing, crosswords, listening to stuff and all that.
Sure.
And then after a long, long time, finally, the van arrived in Tacoma, and they parked. And the drummer, Rick, he came out and he put his hands around me, and he said, "Adrian, can we pray?" I said, "Yeah." Don't forget, we hadn't spoken for about 3 hours.
Right.
Lord, I want to bring Adrian's really ugly face to you. And I want to ask, is there a way right now that you can change that? Make his face more attractive to people? And it was extraordinary. It was extraordinary. I mean, actually, it's my sense of humor, but what made it extraordinary was the fact that we hadn't spoken for about 3 hours. And it's the first thing he wanted to do.
Oh, what a fun story.
I have very precious memories of those. And a quick what's the word? A sort of PS.
Yeah.
It's that just a few years ago, after all this time, I suddenly had out of the blue an email from Randy Thomas.
Randy, yes, good guy.
And he said, we're coming to England. Me and my wife, 30, 40 years ago, we toured together. We'd love to come and see you. And they came. And we had a meal together. It was amazing. We just reconnected after all these decades.
Oh, fun. Yeah. Randy and Brian have both been guests on this program. So yeah, those are fun stories. Well, you talked about at the beginning that maybe you're signing a Christian record deal might not have been the right path for you. And I know that you love Jesus. Why would you say that may not have been the path that you thought you should take?
I think what remains to this very day, on March the 11th, a new trilogy was released.
Yes.
Of mine called Kintsugi, The Art of Precious Scars. But to this very day, my longing is that my work is accessible. And accessible, what I mean by that is, and not musically accessible, what I mean is could be found and promoted to and enjoyed by anybody, anywhere in the world.
Right.
So I never ever thought of myself as a composer, sort of writing for a rather exclusive group of people.
Yeah.
Yes, my faith was absolutely the sort of the core of my being. So my songs would reflect that Christian worldview.
Yeah.
But that didn't mean they'd necessarily all be songs about faith. There could be songs about anything.
Yeah.
But this Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview would be the canvas, the bed.
Yeah.
So I think what I feel is, in my heart, I kind of feel that as a 20-year-old or whatever I was at the time, I was more eager, even desperate for a recording contract.
Oh, yeah.
Than I was to say, Adrian, take a step back, take your time, there's no rush. Let's see over time if you can find the right people to take your career forward. Not in any way saying you can't be a Christian in this business.
Absolutely. Right.
But certainly saying your music is worthy of a much broader audience.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find comparisons. That one particular person that comes to mind is Bono of U2.
Yeah.
Well, and the band U2, and it's a completely different genre of music. But Bono is a deeply committed Christian.
Yes.
And people kind of know that now. But, he and the band U2 kind of understood, I suppose, at the time, that if they were going to have a voice to the world, and not just to the Christian world, they just needed to fight to be heard, and whatever it took, So I guess that's the answer to your question. I want to say, God, thank you for what you've achieved in my life, in my career. I have so much to be grateful for.
Yeah.
But the one remaining profound frustration is that I still don't feel I've found the potential audience for me globally. Yeah. Because I've been
pigeonholed,
compartmentalized into this world of Christian or gospel music.
Yeah.
And that's the frustration.
Well, you mentioned your new album, and I want to make sure we talk about it. And I love the title. It's Kintsugi, The Art of Precious Scars. Now, help us understand, what is Kintsugi? I love this Japanese word and what it represents.
Well, just like you, when I first heard it, I hadn't got a clue what it meant.
Yeah.
It was the mother of a child who I work with as a music therapist, who knew me quite well by then. And she just said to me one day, she brought her son for a music therapy session. And she said, by the way, have you heard of Kintsugi? And I said, what is that like is that food?
Yeah.
Is that a drink? What is it?
Is it like sushi? Yeah.
No, it's the most profound, beautiful art form from Japan. She explained it to me, but then I did my own research. Essentially, as briefly as I can, Kintsugi is a Japanese art form, very established over hundreds of years, where a broken vase or a vessel or a bowl, so shattered for whatever reason, is remade But this time, as it's remade, all of the cracks are sealed by golden glue. So actually often really sort of golden leaf. So it's a quite precious material, not just any ordinary glue. And then as the piece begins to be rebuilt, you get all these extraordinarily golden marks around what were the cracks.
Yeah.
And when the piece is finished, you have this beautiful vessel that is actually more beautiful than when it was new. And the kintsugi, in effect, means the art of precious stars. And when I heard this, I mean, it was like literally that moment I said, not only does that summarize, all that I believe as a Christian about redemption and forgiveness and renewal, but it's got to be the title of a work of mine.
Yeah.
And that was years ago. It's finally come to fruition. But that's what it means. Just this art form that I'd never come across before. And now that I have, and your listeners, your readers, you can just Google Kintsugi and you will find images.
Yes.
Thousands of images.
Beautiful.
Of the results of this work.
Well, and that, like you said, that is a very beautiful picture of the Christian walk and how Jesus can make us whole and make us more precious than we were. But that's also talking about the ministry that you've gone into, the work you've gone into in music therapy, of using music as a tool to help bring broken people, kids, together. Talk a little bit about the transition from performing musician into music therapist, and then talk a little bit about how do you use music as a therapy tool?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm very, very privileged. I really do, because, you must know that many musicians who, after a certain point in their life, it's almost like, how do I sustain this? Right. That's all I am. I'm a musician. It's all I've known. But my audience is lessening. I don't get so many invitations. I'm getting older. Most musicians go through that unless you're at the, absolutely the top of the game, and somehow you never die. Okay, it wasn't exactly that, but I did reach the point towards the end of the 20th century when I was very jaded. I was very tired. And it wasn't just a physical tiredness. It was tired of what it takes to do what I do. And maybe more important, the cost to my family. The years where my children wouldn't know if I was going to be around or not. The years where we couldn't plan a holiday to look forward to because I'd say, oh, but there might be that festival, I need to go and play it. The absences, really. And I was very tired, and I had come to the point of thinking, but what else is there? This is all I know. It's music and composing and music making. Yeah. And then I suddenly remembered that I had listened to a music therapist from Holland years before giving a one-off lecture about music therapy. And she had described how she was working in a psychiatric ward of a prison with men who were probably serving a life sentence because they'd committed very serious crimes.
Sure.
And you can imagine, I was in the audience at the time thinking, my goodness, to tell me what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
She would describe how she would meet with these men. There were 4 of them in each group, and they would be set up with huge drums. And she would facilitate, first of all, a drumming event where each man would pound the drum and express something of where he was. Then they would join as a group, and they would, all 4 of them, pound the drums, beat the hell out of the drums. And then she would facilitate the kind of drawing back and finding some common ground with the rhythm, and then they'd debrief. So I had heard this lecture, and I remember at the time being absolutely riveted.
Yeah.
But I'd forgotten it. And when it came to the turn of the century, as in 1999,
Yeah.
I remembered it. And I said to myself, hang on a minute. Music ultimately is about relationship. It's about, me communicating to you. It's about my authentic person expressing myself to you. It's about trying to say, can we find each other through music when we don't have words?
Yeah.
And I remembered her and I made contact with her. And I said, I want to do this. And she put me in touch with people in England. And that set me on the course to train as a music therapist. And 3 years later, I qualified and I began this new part of my journey, which is working primarily with children and young people with special needs, behavioral difficulties, etc., to do exactly that, to allow music to become their voice when they either don't have words or choose not to use them.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, at the end of the day, that's what music is. So the beautiful thing from my point of view is that in a way, although my stage is rarely now the concert stage,
right.
It is a room with a child, or it's a classroom with a group of children, facilitating them in music making to express who they are, where they are emotionally, etc. And as you kind of hinted at, I think, in the question, the amazing thing, and this is where I really feel I am privileged, is that experience since the year 2003, I think it was when I qualified, step by step, year by year, has begun to feed back into me, the composer, the performing artist. And where I find myself now is that I am writing more prolifically, more music than I ever have before. Music, for the world, not just for music therapy.
Right.
It's all fed back. It's renewed my thinking about music, kind of instruments I use. It has so enriched my understanding of what music is, so that when I now compose and record, hopefully all of that is reflected in what I'm bringing.
Yeah.
Long answer.
No,
Sorry
that's beautiful. That. Well, Kintsugi is a 3-album set, a trilogy, and there are songs on here specifically about the work that you've done. The Cradle Fell is a song that looks like this is a direct reflection of the work that you've been doing. Could you tell us a little bit about the Cradle Fell?
Sure, I can. This is a particularly, let's say, difficult one, because I know this is a slight aside, but one of the difficulties I have with so much Christian music is that it seems to be all about answers,
right,
and resolution, and that's not the way we live our lives. We live our lives in lots of grey, the area of grey rather than black and white, with lots of ambiguity, with lots of uncertainty and irresolution. And I think the most powerful thing about faith is finding a way of holding the balance between what we want, what's the reality, but what we believe. So I use that as an introduction because the child around whom the Cradle Fell is written was very broken. And I don't know, nobody knows fully the extent to which her family life was broken. But she struggled. She was very autistic. She couldn't speak. Well, she didn't use words.
Right.
But she was very aware and very emotional as a girl. She's we're talking a 7-year-old here.
Okay.
So she was present in the moment, but present in the most dynamic and sometimes difficult way, because there was so much going on inside her.
And you home alone, abandoned. Now the world is only you. Mother love, she felt exhausted, 'cause she couldn't make it through. roses around your deep brown eyes. See how they amplify your pain. Face broken story picture. Violence always leaves a sting. And those who should have always carried you, held you safe and sound, had nothing left to give or offer you. You were simply lost, not found, born into confusion, damaged from the start, and even words somehow withheld from you as your cradle fell apart. They were mainly shouted at you, often hurled, sometimes screamed, but you simply had no answers as you lived between extremes. I came here truly empty-handed, for I know your need is not for things, but I will give if you allow me my heart which cries for you and sings. A mother tongue should truly be the language of love, and songs can sometimes better tell you this when words are not enough. You may well wander round in circles, and you may often choose to flee, but please, my child, always remember you can always run to me. And if one day you let me lead you to a far, far better land, then our footprints will appear as one before the wind reshapes the sand. For I know that I can reach you. Many times I sang your name, and you smiled from recognition. And we laughed and danced again. You bring me things that took your fancy, and then you'd place them in my hands, insist I'd make them sound and sing for you. Then I'd understand the way you make connections, the way to help you grow, the way to hold and comfort you. A window to your soul.
And over a period of time, I found that I found a way, I think, to her. Not that she was always happy in our sessions, but I think I found a way to her.
Yeah.
And we would begin to work together. She would give me instruments to play. We would sometimes vocalize together. And then things took a turn for the worse. And she had to be, well, let's say, isolated from the class. So she couldn't be a member of a class anymore. She had to be on her own. And I would go into her space once a week and just work with her. So already it was incredibly painful because, you know, she was no longer considered safe to be with other children.
Yeah.
But still, you know, I loved her very much. And I still believe that, you know, the contact we had was a mirror, was a reflection of that love. And I think, you know, I have memories of the way I think she expressed her own response to that.
Yeah.
the ending of the story, which is what I mean about non-resolution, is that one day the school realized that they hadn't seen her for a couple of days. And in I don't know how it is in the USA, but in America, in England, schooling is obligatory.
Right.
You know, you can't just take the child out. So there comes a point when the school has to go to the home and say, well, where is your child? And they went to the home, and the mother was dead, and she had died in the kitchen of the home, and the girl was upstairs in her bedroom. And out of the situation, of course, I mean, she was taken into care. I don't know where. And from, you know, she continued to come to the school I work in for about 2 months while her new placement was sorted out.
Right.
And then she was taken. And I've never seen or heard from her since. So, you know, for me, that story and that song, it's so important because it is about love. It's about unseen hope because we don't know the outcome.
Right.
It's about the way we connect through music, but we have to just accept that we don't know the end of the story.
Right.
And I think it is about scars. You know, it's about precious scars. Now, I pray that she, you know, in years to come, will find peace of mind, of heart and spirit, maybe remember our sessions, and that her scars will become, you know, a golden thread. But I don't know.
Right.
And that's why songs like that on Kintsugi, to me, are so important, because it's just saying, you know, we don't know, but we do what we can, and we do it out of our love of God, and our brothers and sisters and our children that are part of our lives.
Well, you know, the thing that I realize in life is that so much of life we're trying to make things wrapped up in a pretty bow, and like you said, it's not a pretty bow. I've been reading through the Psalms, and my listeners will know this, but you know, the thing in the Psalms, most of the situations don't change when the psalmist is writing out and crying. What changes is the person's heart, and the situation is still the same. So I think it's important that we remember these kinds of stories. So thank you for sharing.
That's very deep, Dave. What you said there, very deep. What you say, because around this kind of area of thinking, people lose their faith, as well as find it. You know, people who feel they've prayed for you know, days, years for an answer, and it didn't come, and they say, right, then there isn't a God. There can't be, because he didn't meet me. And I think, you know, actually, I think that's very out there at the moment. A lot of people struggling with faith. You know, right now, I'm sure you have the news too about Ukraine and about the war in Ukraine. So each day we sit here watching men, women, and children being killed. Right now, you know, in another country. And of course we pray, like, Lord, intervene. God, just bring Putin and his generals, bring them down and stop this. And it goes on. You know, and this evening, about 2 hours ago, you know, I was watching pictures of an apartment building in Kyiv that had been blown apart. And a lady, an older lady, outside the apartment block saying, I'm sure that my friend was lost in this explosion because she couldn't walk. You know, and I'm sitting there thinking, but Lord, you could do whatever you want. So we really do, I think, have to face some very difficult questions as people of faith. You know, what are we saying then about God's involvement in our world and how he involves himself? And that's the macro, but the micro, I suppose, is my world and people like this girl and the cradle fell. You know, it's just saying, I'm not going to give up my faith, but my goodness, have I got questions.
Well, Adrian, every Saturday I send out a newsletter to a number of people who have committed to praying for artists and people using music as their vocation. How can we specifically be praying for you in the weeks and the months that are in front of us?
That's a very precious request. Okay, so on the sort of artistic, professional level, exactly as I said to you earlier, I long for Kintsugi to find its way into the lives of millions, not just thousands. This is not about money making. This is about, as it always has been, it's about access. I just want people to hear it wherever they are in the world. It needs to be given the chance to listen to Adrian Snell, and then they can say, I really like that. I want to find out more, or that's not for me. It's access. So that on that level. On a more personal level, do you know what? It's linked to kind of a little bit of what we've talked about. It's hope of change. When you reach your 60s, there are these things that you've fought personally for decades, these aspects of your life that you long to be free from, or see change, or see healing, or whatever. And when they are still there and they rear their ugly head, you do find yourself thinking, okay, so is that it? I'm just going to have to live with all these difficulties, these areas of my life that I so struggle with. So I think it would be about asking people to pray that my hope is restored, my hope of change, or it's very easy to lose hope. Not to lose faith. I don't think that will happen for me, but I can lose hope, and that's serious, because if we lose hope, then we become. I almost want to use the word cynical. I desperately don't want to ever become cynical. I think it's the most damaging, destructive emotion. Cynicism and despair go together, But if you lose hope of change, if you kind of year after year after year, you think, well, this hasn't changed. Something does shift in you. And you start to say, well, okay. And I'm not sure how to define that, but I don't want that. I would love for people to pray, Lord, keep Adrian childlike, a sense of wonder, believing in better and change.
Thank you for sharing your story with us today, Adrian. I'm especially captivated by your reminder that even as we become more mature in our walk with Jesus, we will still have questions, some of which we might not ever find answers to. That brings me to a personal story that I'd like to share with you. I was born in Bolivia while my parents were missionaries in South America. After a transition, they became pastors, and for the first 18 years of my life, my parents were involved in some sort of church leadership. My brother followed in their footsteps and has been a music pastor for most of his adult life. My sister is married to a pastor, so all of my family has been in professional church leadership. Well, that is, except for me. I followed the business world path. I've often wondered why it was that I didn't follow in the family business like my siblings did. And as I've grown older, I've recognized that God needs business leaders in church and ministry too. So even though I'm just a number cruncher and balance budgets, my work is vital kingdom work, just like my family being missionaries and pastors. That brings me to one of my favorite life verses in Colossians 3:17. And whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. Or I think of the story Jesus told in Matthew 25 about the sheep and goats, how in the final judgment God will look at all the things we do and recognize how we made a difference by providing hospitality, meeting people in prison, or helping the sick. So, what are you and I called to do? A lot of people, myself included, have wrestled with what is God's call on my life. And I've come to believe that our skills, abilities, and even our interests are gifts that God gives us to use. And just because we aren't on the stage or a platform, that doesn't mean that God won't use those gifts He's given us through us. Adrian Snell is using his musical gifts to reach kids. His stage has become a classroom and playing music with kids to help them find the gold glue that not only puts their broken lives back together, but makes them more beautiful and more valuable than ever. I have a passion for business and accounting. How can God use that to further His kingdom? Maybe you love fixing cars or hunting. How can you use those God-given interests and abilities to make a difference for eternity? Or how about guys who love sports? What would it look like to use your skills to reach people for Jesus? I am certain that God, who began the good work within you by giving you skills, talents, and interests, will continue His work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. This week, I featured Adrian Snell's song, The Cradle Fell, and you'll find that on his brand new album entitled Kintsugi, The Art of Precious Scars. I'd like to thank Adrian for the permission to share that song with you, and you can pick up this great collection on Adrian's website. It's 3 CDs full of amazing music, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You really need to check out this Kintsugi album because it just might be some of Adrian's best work. And while you're on his website, you can learn more about his amazing work. And remember that buying music and books directly from the artist is the best way to support their work. Thanks for supporting Adrian in this way. As always, thank you for joining me for this conversation today. I am grateful that we get to spend this time together each week hearing stories of God's amazing faithfulness. As a regular listener to this podcast, would you reach out and say hello? You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn by searching for @CCMExchange. Or you can also drop me a line on the webpage, ChristianMusicArchive.com. Next week, I'm talking with one of the best harmonica players you've ever heard. Buddy Green has performed all over the world and has written one of the biggest Christmas songs in modern music. I'm pretty sure you will enjoy this conversation, so be sure to tune in next week and every week when I share stories of the people you'll find on the pages of the Christian Music Archive. Finally, to wrap things up, I want to remind you this: God loves you. In fact, He's crazy about you.
It's time for another Mischievous Maurer's Miscellaneous Misquotes.
People found guilty of not using punctuation deserve the longest sentence possible.